Good morning, peoples.
Story time. We crept back to my bedroom with our book bags, and the familiar ammonia of my elderly grandmother hit me for the last time. I instantly crawled under my bed and filled my bag with all of my notebooks and art supplies. My whole fortress of solitude would easily fit in my backpack. Thupton and I sat on my bed and doodled in a notebook. I got trash bags from the kitchen and filled them up with my clothes. I was all packed up and ready to go. A part of me was feeling relief. I could feel that something was ending. I didn't know then how right I was. We heard my mother and Mr. Riley arguing. We ignored it as best we could. However, I did overhear that Mr. Riley's wife was serving him divorce papers because of his affair with my mother. He said that if he didn't get home soon, he would lose his planes. I didn't care. In fact, I hoped he would lose everything. I hoped that the end of his freedom would be the beginning of my own. I shouldn't have wished evil on him, but I did. I don't regret it, even now. Everything was beyond my control. Karma favored me for what felt like the first time in ages. I didn't understand then that a poor man has nothing left to lose. We were just children who had tasted freedom for the first time. All that we wanted from the world was to be given wings so that we could fly away from it. But broken wings can't fly, and broken legs can't run. We were both happy, Thugton and I. The window was open, letting in a cool breeze. I could hear Panic making his bed for the night in the bushes, just feet below us. We were sharing Thupton's headset and listening to the Grateful Dead on his Walkman. He held my hand. I let him. I didn't know why. It felt innocent, sweet. "I love you, Jacob," he said to me. "I love you too, Thupton." Our heads were close and we were lip-syncing lyrics when he leaned in to kiss me. I don't know why, but I started to return his gesture. This is so stupid, I thought. This can't be. Society won't allow it. And besides, I like girls. Plus, Mr. Riley is home. But what can it hurt? It's just a kiss. Our mouths were almost touching when the door to my bedroom was opened. We must not have heard his heavy footsteps because of Jerry Garcia. I could see Mr. Riley's mind working, turning gears slowly, deciding whether to call out to my mother. He decided. He stepped in a few feet further with a fire in his eyes that made me die inside. He pushed the door closed behind him, locking it more delicately than I thought he could in such a drunken state. "I come to tell you goodbye for the last time, boy, and here you are, about to suck your little zipperhead boyfriend's cock." His white t-shirt was covered in grease, the blood of his aircrafts, and bulging at the breast pocket with a pack of Cool 100s. His muscles flared like a cobra's neck before it strikes. Thupton backed up against the wall, curled up in a fetal ball on my bed. I was crawling in the opposite direction and rolled with a thud onto the floor next to the window, scrambling to put distance between Mr. Riley and myself. I had never seen Thupton in a violent situation like this. He was scared. He looked at me with wide eyes. I stared back. He was a tiny beach rock with the entire ocean being thrown against it. I didn't know what to do. My brain was melting. I was dying spiritually. This couldn't be real, but it was no product of my imagination. The piss flowed involuntarily down my legs. Thupten whispered to me, "Believe, Jacob. Eagles in the sky." Mr. Riley was out of his mind in a filthy, hate-filled rage. "Little yellow fucker, trying to fag up Sheila's boy, bringing disease and abomination into my house?" He took 2 looming steps up to the bed and grabbed up Thupten like a rag doll. My bed fortress could protect no one now. I stood up on wobbling legs. I would save my friend or die trying. Mr. Riley hit Thupten one time, straight in the face. His fist balled up like a cinder block. Thupten's face sprayed blood like a crushed fruit. "Zipperhead," Mr. Riley laughed. Thupten fell limp. "No!" I shrieked. Thupten never once tried to fight Mr. Riley off him. His voice was just gargles now, but he tried to talk to me. He was leaving his worldly vessel. I tried to walk forward, but some force held me back, possibly fear, maybe just impossibility of what was going on around me. Maybe it was destiny that I didn't fight back. Mr. Riley, the demon, had gone insane. "No, leave him alone! Thupten! Thub! Thub!" Mr. Riley bashed Thupten in the face several times before grabbing him by the hair and slamming his innocent golden face into the solid oak bed rail. I was crying ferociously, yelling, trying to move. I was in shock, shaking and stammering, swaying in place. My best friend's face was getting destroyed in front of me. No more sounds came from Thupten's lifeless body. Mr. Riley's white shirt was speckled with blood, and his hand was covered in bits of brain and the pulpy flesh of his victim. Henry had single-handedly chopped down a rare and mighty white tree. Mr. Riley let loose Thupten's skull, and the body of my best friend fell to the bed. His head was dented in, and his virgin blood pooled on my dead grandmother's bedsheets. I was looking at my dead soulmate, his white aura rising and dissipating before my eyes. He is free. Mr. Riley turned toward me and wiped his hands on his shirt. My mother was nowhere to be seen. "Your turn, boy." With this utterance, panic bolted in through the open window next to me, snarling and growling. He jumped on Mr. Riley and latched onto his arm, saliva flying from his dagger-like incisors. I turned around and found the courage to leap out the window head first. Mr. Riley punched Panic, who was swinging from his arm. Panic would not let go. Finally, Mr. Riley was able to fling Panic from his arm. My dog hit the wall next to my bed with a bang. Mr. Riley scrambled out the window after me, having a much harder time than I did. Panic regained himself and lunged at Mr. Riley from behind. Mr. Riley kicked him off and fell out to the bushes below. I took off running down the driveway toward Pastor Casey's parsonage. I looked back at the villain behind me and saw him grab a shovel out of the back of his red truck as he raced after me. "Thupten, oh Thupten," I mourned. I was crying hard, and it was dark outside. I lost my footing in one of the many holes in my mother's unmaintained driveway. This shortened the distance between us, but panic was already hot on Mr. Riley's tail. I made it into the field of dreams adjacent to the parsonage and ran into one of the huge circles I had barely noticed earlier. The weeds were pressed down flat in a spiraling pattern. I turned around to see Mr. Riley several yards in front of me, marching through the knee-high grass, brandishing a shovel in his blood-soaked hand. He turned to face panic as the large black Labrador leapt into the air, growling and snarling. His fur was bristled up. He would die defending me, and I had only known him a week. Surely this was the love of God. Mr. Riley caught Panic in the face with the shovel and sent him to the ground. Panic lay still. His purposes served. De anda. I rose in the constellation of the dog. Syrian solstice. My last line of defense was easily vanquished. The beast would kill me with the same hands he killed Thubten with. There was nothing more I could do. I stood there and waited for him to come. I stood there without fear of death. I stood there waiting to see Thubten's white spirit again. I was in the middle of one of the two interconnecting circles, my nemesis wading through the weeds to the edge of the clearing. I heard the front door of the parsonage open and slam closed, and Pastor Casey ran out, with his white house robe flapping in the wind. I was happy to see his brilliant white aura. He would avenge the death of his fellow pure soul. He would save me. "I'll protect you, Jacob." He rushed straight for Mr. Riley with a baseball bat raised high above his head. Mr. Riley turned to face his new enemy and gripped a hold of the shovel with both of his hands. I remembered the cleric that was slain by the dragon during a lunch D&D session earlier that week. "Run, Jacob!" I couldn't. "Want to wrestle with someone your own size?" Pastor Casey was ready to battle evil head-on. Pastor Casey's scarred face was twisted in a grimace, and then a fight like no other erupted on the outskirts of the circle. Their weapons twanged together. Mr. Riley circled the Reverend like a barbarian. He struck out with his shovel, only to be deflected artfully by the white-robed, scholar warrior. A part of Mr. Casey left over from his days as a bully must have felt at home in combat. This seemed to go on for a long while, this deadly dance. They didn't talk. They brawled. In one quick maneuver, Mr. Riley hit the pastor across his broad back with the end of the shovel and sent him to his knees. The fire in Mr. Riley's eyes could not be contained by this man of God. Michael was losing his fight against the dragon. Another stroke of Mr. Riley's shovel connected with the pastor's head with a clang. I yelped. Mr. Riley brought the shovel down on him again and again, at first swatting at him like a bug, then spearing him with downward thrusts like he was digging post holes. I witnessed the death of the only other white aura I had ever known. Mr. Casey made the ground below him holy for all time. He shed his blood for me. He died for my life. I suppose Mr. Riley thought, what the hell? What's another life sentence? They can't fry me twice in an electrical chair. Or maybe he knew that he was already dead. He had already lost everything he cared about. He might as well bring me down with him. Mr. Riley turned from his second victim of the night. He was on the outside of my protective circle, looking in, covered in even more virgin blood and breathing heavily. "You should never have been born, boy. You know what kind of problems you caused me? You know how much your mama hates you? She wishes she had the house all to herself. Now I'm going to do my Sheila a favor. She should have done this with you when you were still in her." My stomach no longer hurt. The doom was here, and we would leave together. He approached me with his shovel. "I'm gonna bury you all with this very same shovel, and no one will ever find you. No one will ever notice you're gone. You, that fairy chink, and Bat Boy will rot together in a ditch forever." He slowly approached, languishing this moment. He was enjoying himself. He was sick. But he could not make me fear him any longer. I would not give him that satisfaction. I would not feed his negative energy. Death was a part of life. I felt sorry for him. I stood there and bowed my head. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "You just don't know any better, do you?" I raised my head and my hands toward the sky. "What did you say to me, boy?" he yelled out. I could hear fear in his voice. The ground began to vibrate, or maybe I was just becoming aware of an already existing vibration. He entered the circle with me, but I could no longer see him. I could just see the stars in the sky. I would be with Thupten soon. The stars seemed to come alive and talk to me. All things go extinct in the flesh. Even stars die, but their light lives on forever. Mr. Riley lurched over to me and swung the shovel with full force against my leg. I felt it break where I stood. I fell to the ground. I could only see the sky above me, the stars and the moon. The clouds parted. "I believe." The words left me like vapor in the wind. A bright light filled the sky, and I felt light like helium. I could only see a beautiful pearly glow. What the hell? I heard the shovel hit the ground, and I blacked out. Something was with me, and I was safe. I would not rejoin Thupten that night, but I knew now that he was waiting for me, in the spirit. The light was fleeting, its protection limited. The beast was allowed to live. When the light disappeared, I became aware again. I felt as if I was hanging upside down. When my senses flooded back into me, I could smell the stink of motor oil. I realized my good leg was tied to the wooden rafter of the rickety dogwood shed behind my trailer that used to be a grain store in decades past. My broken leg was attached only by a shred of skin. Someone had tied my injured leg's foot to my other knee. I assumed this was to keep gravity from ripping my dying leg off at the break. I spun slowly like an upside-down jewelry box ballerina. I saw the 4 golden orbs of time lying in the dirt below me. The cross that once held them together was broken to pieces, and they lay jagged as a game of jacks. They must have fallen out of my pocket. They were no longer orbs of temporal distortion, just round chunks of metal. My childhood had ended, and now they held no power. They would not allow me to reverse time or stop it. I contemplated them like a voodooist studies the thrown bones of a chicken, like cast runes on silver coins. Mysteries were revealed. I knew they were nothing more than flashy clock innards. But these orbs held a special importance to me. As I peered deep into their dirty, dull metallic surface, time stopped. Their power was not lost after all. Information flooded into me from some other dimension where time is meaningless. I realized then that the orbs were both mundane and magical, as all things in this world are. Many hours passed. I knew this timelessness would not last. I would never see those orbs again, but now I knew their secret language. A language for a future generation. A future Jacob. I heard the shovel once again, this time digging into the dirt. In the pale gleam of the floodlight in my backyard, I could see two lumps beside Mr. Riley as he dug. I recognized them as Pastor Casey and Thupton by their sizes. They waited patiently for their graves under a thick, sickly ash tree. Ashes to ashes. Shadowy black spirits stood next to Riley, overseeing his diabolical work. "You've been out there for almost 9 hours, Henry. Hurry up and come on inside," my mother called out. "I'll only be a few more minutes," he growled. "Dig the holes deep," she yelled out. I couldn't believe this. Was this really happening? Was I already dead? Could this be hell? That light had come to steal my soul. My mind retreated into the familiar nightmare that surrounded my childhood. My sanity and my grasp on this world began to slip away from me again. I shuffled off into the cold, black void. I was ready to die, a hanged man, leaving this world upside down. Just as I had come into this world, I would be born into the next. The light would wait until it was ready to expose itself to me again. I was already dead.